This is a recording talking about the Schmidtz lecture. We didn't quite get up all the way up to it, so I'm gonna try and talk, explain some more about what's going on because it's a reading that takes a little digesting. Um, Schmidtz takes direct aim at Singer, and people who like Singer think that there is an obligation to help others. Schmidtz takes a very strong view on this. He thinks there is no such obligation, at least not as a general moral principle. And his argument tries to explain why that kind of principle would be unacceptable. So he has a few arguments that he gives. One, he starts out by showing that accepting that principle would have unacceptable implications. It's actually something we cannot live with. That's one. And then he goes to make a distinction between that type of principle and just basic reasons for helping. And he accepts that we have basic reasons for helping, but not an obligation to help. And then he goes through trying to explain why he thinks this is a good. This is still something that we can live with. It's still something that actually matches with what works in the world. So I'm going to focus mostly on the first two steps here. So the first step is what's so problematic about this, what he calls the Singer principle. And he starts with a couple of what he's saying thinks these are implications that are too much. So first, here's how the argument goes, right? It says, well, look, this Singer principle doesn't just apply to helping people and making sure that good things happen. Preventing bad things from happening can be done by bestowing benefits. It also applies to where the bad things go. Right? So think about it this way. Singer principle says if you can prevent something bad from happening without something of without incurring something of a comparable or too big of a moral cost, then you should do it. Well, bad things are happening in a variety of ways. So one is, of course, when people are starving and you can do something about it. The other thing is when there's something like pollution. Pollution is a bad thing, and if it's happening here, you might say, well, here are people who have very high standards of living who will be harmed very much by, say, nuclear waste being present. Maybe we should ship it to other places where there aren't as many people, or they don't have as high standards of living, or there are no people, like Antarctica. Environmental preserves or something. Now, you might not like that, right? But if the principle is you should make sure that harms are prevented when the cost of doing so isn't so great, then it seems to follow that sometimes you need to just export bads as well. But of course, he thinks, well, that can't be right, and so it seems that it's a bad theory about what we do with the harmful stuff. But now Schmidtz says this is actually theory about harms is exactly the same as the theory about benefits. It's just about making sure that people's lives go better, and we count every life the same. This is how Singer would want it. And if that's true, then well, if this is a bad theory about harms, and the theory is the same about harms as about benefits, then it has to be a bad theory about benefits too. That's basically the reasoning here. Of course, you might object to some of this. I might say, well, but maybe the moral cost of polluting Antarctica are too great. That's something we cannot live with. Okay, fair enough, but you can come up with a different type of example, right? So think about, let's say it's not in our power to do something about serious poverty in some developing nation. If it's not in our power to do something about the harm that are going on there, and they're very serious harms, then the harms are going to be there no matter what. Which might mean that you should just, by this principle, start exporting further harms there, because life is already crappy and can go much further down and so on. Now that sounds awful. It is awful, right? But that's exactly Schmitz's point. This is an awful idea, and the logic of Singer's theory seems to lead you there. So something must be going wrong. Here's another version of the same argument. Singer has written a lot about famine relief. He's also written a lot about animal rights. Animal liberation was book he wrote in the 1970s, and it really set off the whole a big part of the animal rights movement. So Singer's point is we should prevent avoidable suffering, not just for people, but also for animals. And not just like not hurt animals yourself, you should actively prevent it, right? Just the same as with people. It's not enough to not kill people, you should save people who are dying. But now, Schmidtz says, now our menu starts filling up, right? Not only do we have to take care of suffering human beings, we also have to take care of suffering animals. And that means we just have very, very little other things to do. Like if the animals really matter, then maybe world hunger won't take as much of a front seat anymore. Or the other way around, right? Never mind things like showing up for your job, being nice to your kid, and so on. And so Schmidtz says, well, actually, this Singer principle doesn't even have the implication that Singer himself defends, because Singer does things like writing books on world hunger and so on. So how does he have the time if he would take his own theory seriously? That's the view that Schmidtz makes, and he says, look, we can now start to see that the principle has to be false. He can't even live up to it himself. Now, Schmidtz claims this is not an ad hominem argument. Ad hominem arguments generally are when you attack the speaker or the person who makes the argument rather than the argument itself. That's a fallacy. It's a mistake, because even if the speaker is somehow a bad person or a hypocrite or whatever, I'm not saying that Singer is, but even if he is, it doesn't follow that the argument he's offering is bad. He might still be right, even if he himself is a hypocrite. And Schmidtz says he's not doing that. He's trying to make a deeper point. He's trying to say the fact that Singer can't live with that theory, or with the theory just ruthlessly applied that way, that shows you something about the theory. Not about Singer, but about the theory. Alright, so here's the third version of the worry. And this is not just like this leads to weird places. This is a point Schmidtz is making about how taking the Singer principle seriously will actually be self-defeating. So like you'll destroy your own goal. So he gives an example from Humboldt in Canada, which is where he's from. He says, look, suppose that I stop consuming by spending on trivia. I think the example he gives is going to the cinema. So don't go to the movies anymore. Well, that means that the person who's running the movies, to the extent that people stop going to the movies, will not be able to produce movies anymore. They'll have to close one of the rooms in the cinema. Maybe if all of us do it, they have to close the entire theater. Okay, so I'm out there saving lives, but those people have lost their jobs. You think, okay, well, that's not a comparable bad, says Singer. Well, of course, the fact that those people have lost their jobs itself doesn't come in isolation either. That means those people aren't buying from other people anymore, and those people might lose their jobs, and so especially if person B also is taking Singer's principle seriously and is also donating to solve world hunger and so on. And the idea is you get this sort of, it's not just one person's isolated expense that is being changed here. It's a whole chain of events that's being changed. And so if no one is producing, if the whole chain starts unraveling, then we cannot give people resources that are actually solving world hunger anymore, because those resources won't exist anymore. They only exist when we produce. So here's the idea. So let's say that we have a simple version of the principle. Just say help whenever you can. This is self-defeating, says Schmidtz, because that means we'll end up not being able to help. You're jumping in pools all the time to pull out these drowning children, which means at some point you just don't have any money left to save the next person. You never show up for your job anymore. If that's going to be a general theory, so if we just take the simple demand, like help whenever you can, to be a general theory, and the simple demand is self-defeating, then the general theory would be self-defeating. But that can't be true. So the general theory has to be different. It has to be different in such a way that it does not undercut our ability to help in the first place. The general theory must be consistent with continuing to be in a position where we can actually save people from hunger. And that means not making everyone be poor. Singer might say something like this, right? Like, well, okay, but then we have to just give a bunch up until the point where the chain starts unraveling. Schmidtz doesn't think that that's how it works, of course, but that's up to you to think who's right about that. So those are Schmitz's worries about the theory, right? So it leads to, if you take it simple, it leads to very bizarre consequences, and it actually cuts against itself. And if we're going to make this into a general theory, we have to limit it in some way. So here's an example. He makes a distinction between principles and reasons, and this example is tragic commons. So tragic commons, a baby is drowning, you can save it, but it involves giving people $100. If you don't save it, it will die. You save the baby, now more people show up, and they start throwing their babies in the pool, looking whether you'll actually spend $100 on them too. Of course, Schmidtz doesn't think that this is actually what world hunger is like, right? It's not actual people sacrificing their own children. But he mentions this starts becoming a little more realistic when the people who are throwing the babies aren't the parents, but are dictators. His idea being that if you create an incentive for people to be in need, if you make sure that what pays in life is people being in need, what you're going to produce is not an end to world hunger, but it's what you're going to produce is people being in need, because that is the thing what pays. What pays is not solving world hunger. What pays is there being world hunger. That's his point. So here comes the distinction between a reason and a principle. He says, is there a reason to jump in and save the baby? Yes, always. Nobody would deny that. But can it be a general principle? Well, it depends, right? So he says, no, it depends, because when we evaluate a principle, we have to ask whether we're in a static or a dynamic situation. So the difference is just simple like this. The static is like a prisoner's dilemma, if you remember that. Prisoner's dilemma is, what got the prisoner's dilemma going is you have to make your decision independent of the other person. Right? So you go through this reasoning. Will this person attack me? If yes, I should do it. I should attack this person first. If no, I should still attack this person first. But you're going through both possibilities, and what the other person does is not itself a response to what you might be doing, and vice versa. In dynamic situations, it's different. In dynamic situations, the thing that you do changes what the other people might do. And that's the thing that Tragic Commons here is picking up on. Right? He says, look, the fact that you're showing up to save babies is not itself a static thing. It's not itself something without consequences. It has consequences, and the consequences are what other people are going to be doing. So if you create an incentive for there to be people in need, people might change their actions in such a way that produce need rather than solutions. And so if the Singer principle is going to be a moral principle, it has to be acceptable in dynamic consequences, because our world is a dynamic world. People actually do respond. And Tragic Commons shows that it's not acceptable as a moral principle. So here's the idea. Sometimes to get the best outcome, you shouldn't directly aim at the best. You shouldn't always try to maximize your outcome. You should accept that there's a constraint to what you yourself can do. So the Singer principle asks you to just do the best that you can. Here's a person drowning. Can you make the situation better? Yes, well then do that. But as we've just seen, at least Schmidtz argues, we actually don't make the world better that way. Maximizing is not. To maximize in every individual situation is not itself a maximizing strategy. That's what makes it self-defeating. So the idea is we can actually bring about more good by making sure that we accept certain constraints. That we don't always do the best that can be expected of us, but we do less. And when each of us tries to do less and just goes to work and buys a movie ticket and so on, we actually end up together doing more. So here's the point, right? So if you want to make the world better, even if you want to be a smart utilitarian, as Singer might want to be in his heart of hearts, then you should recognize constraints on good maximization. You shouldn't always be trying to produce the most good, even though that's what the utilitarian says. And so this is what rights are for, says Schmidtz. Right? So he has this example about a hospital, about harvesting organs and so on. He says rights, they function as constraints on good maximization. They protect you from being used to actually serve like better people, um, other people's health, and as a result, we're all healthier. Because if we didn't, we couldn't have hospitals. But that extends beyond your body, right? So that's your kidneys and so on, but it also is true to your money, including money that you spend on trivial stuff. These rights protect you from being required by the Singer principle. That's what Schmidtz says. The fact that you have a right to your money means that you get to decide how to spend it. And that's even contrary to the weak Singer principle. Hold on. Note this, right? The weak Singer principle said you don't have to help until you're poor yourself too. You have to help until the demand on you becomes too burdensome, whatever that might mean. That is itself, that even a weaker, more modest requirement, that too is something that Schmidtz wants to reject. He thinks that itself already is an unstable, overbearing demand. You can't expect people to even make that type of sacrifice. Because if you did, the world as a whole would become much worse. People who object to Schmidtz, let's put it this way, it's one thing to try and poke a hole in Schmitz's logic. People have tried to. There's ways you might object to various of the steps, but you better be able to do so. Right? It's the same as with Singer. If you think his conclusion is hysterical, accepting Singer's principle will make the world a worse place, that you think this cannot be true, that's fine, but you have to find a way in which the analysis goes wrong. And that's of course true of Singer too, right? If you thought with Singer, well, actually something like what Schmidtz is saying is true, this will actually make all of us poor. You have to still find a hole in Singer's logic. What Schmidtz is saying is that Singer makes the following mistake. Singer thinks, well, here's one case in which I can save, the pond case, right? But of course, our world is just a whole repeated series of ponds. One person is in need, I've saved that person. There's another person who's in need. Can I save that person? There's another person in need. Can I save that person? And so on, and so on. That's the thing that Schmidtz is attacking, right? That you can't treat these cases as just being the same once they come one after the other. Because once they start coming one after the other, what you do to them has an effect on how many of these cases are coming. All right, so here are a couple of questions to end on. First, do you think this is a compelling or convincing distinction? Right. So he says there's a reason to save in each of these cases. Every pond you come by, there's a reason to save the person. But there cannot be a requirement that we treat every pond as if it was the first. Why? Well, because this in the world where you have that type of a principle, where we're talking about every pond, we're talking about a dynamic situation, not a static situation. Here's how Schmidtz ends his piece. He says, we must of course remain or become humbly aware that revolutions imposed by alien cultures and philosophies, like people like you and I coming up with new solutions, even he's talking about, they actually have no history of working. This is not something that does have a track record of solving poverty. Nothing we do will have only the effects that we intend. The only course with a history of helping people in the long term is whatever enables them to take responsibility for their own futures, and even that is no guarantee. This, of course, is a much more passive or maybe harsh conclusion, if you will. It might be the right conclusion, but it does seem startling at times. Of course, Schmidtz is setting it up as if either we accept we go all the way down to this, or we accept something like what Singer is saying. And so you have to wonder whether those really are our only options. Anytime a question like that is raised, you should wonder whether something is being illegitimately taken off the table. Alright, I think that's it.